Dark Reflection by Kiramel. Read by My Lost and Found. Summary. Just when the tension is about to snap, the purple one snorts. He covers his mouth with his hands, which seems redundant considering his metallic face mask, but he couldn't seem to stop his shoulders from shaking. Sorry, but you said... He snorts again. You said you summoned us to fight All Might. All for One turns in their direction, and Izuku was sure that if the man had a face, he would be frowning. The motion alone was enough to send a shiver of foreboding down his spine. The newcomers seem to be unaffected, though, as the purple one starts outright cackling in glee. Is this what one calls shooting yourself in the foot? The silver one asks, and his monotone seems oddly familiar. The purple one cackles louder, and the green one sighs with a deep, resigned exasperation that Izuku could feel in his soul, but answers nonetheless. Yes, it is also called the height of irony. The purple one stopped cackling only to say, I think this could be put into the cosmic joke category. The silver one nodded, completely serious. I understand. Thank you. The battlefield stilled as a dark portal opened above their heads. Heroes and villains alike paused in their fights to stare as One for All twisted Kurogiri's body with nothing but a flick of his wrist. The portal grew, and so did the pressure in the air, as if the very universe was resisting All for One's attempts to tear it apart. Finally, with a snap like something breaking, 3 dark figures part the mist. The portal flickers, closes, and Kurogiri falls to the ground and stays there, unconscious. The 3 figures land in crouched positions, tense and ready to fight or flight as they catalog their surroundings. They get up slowly and fall back into an easy formation, one of them in the front, the 2 other flanking him, covering each other's blind spots. They were all dressed in dark tactical gear, with face masks and deep hoods to cover their hair. Izuku wonders how they all see. Their costumes are similar, professional and practical, with more pockets than Izuku would know what to do with. There are arm guards and knee guards, and at least 1 knife on each of them that he could see. The only thing that sets them apart was the thin veins of color running through their costumes, each one different. The one in the front has green, the one to the left of him, silver, and the one to the right, purple. Greet your death, All Might. These villains have been summoned from a much darker world than ours. Your life is forfeit. That seems to break everyone out of their stupor, and All Might gets into a fighting stance, much more cautious than before, but still confident. The heroes all look uneasy, which is understandable, considering the 3 newcomers have yet to say a word, and looked dangerous enough to make All Might wary. The villains all cackle or grin, assured in their victory. Just when the tension is about to snap, the purple one snorts. He covers his mouth with his hands, which seems redundant considering his metallic face mask, but he couldn't seem to stop his shoulders from shaking. Sorry, but you said... He snorts again. You said you summoned us to fight All Might? All for One turns in their direction, and Izuku was sure that if the man had a face, he would be frowning. The motion alone was enough to send a shiver of foreboding down his spine. The newcomers seem to be unaffected, though, as the purple one starts outright cackling in glee. Is this what's called shooting yourself in the foot? The silver one asks. His monotone seems oddly familiar. The purple one cackles louder, and the green one sighs with a deep, resigned exasperation that Izuku could feel in his soul, but answers nonetheless. Yes, it is also called the height of irony. The purple one stopped cackling, only to say, I think this could be put into the cosmic joke category. The silver one nodded, completely serious. I understand. Thank you. Enough of this nonsense, All for One says. You will kill All Might, and I shall give you everything you could desire. I'm sure I could triple whatever my alternative self is paying you. Ah, I think you might be mistaken, the green one says, very casually, as if explaining to someone that got the wrong phone number. No, they were not their cousin Tristan, and yes, he was absolutely sure. We do not work for you. As a matter of fact, we're quite against you and your lackeys. His voice is steady, with no inflection to be heard except for the dangerous undertone that dared anyone to make a single threatening gesture in their direction. You are no heroes, All for One stated, as if it were fact. So name your price, and I shall give it to you. That is correct. We are no heroes, the green one acknowledges, and slowly raises his hands to his hood, as every hero tenses. But we're no villains either. He flips his hood, and Izuku freezes at the sight of familiar green curls, if a little long and gathered in a bun, and large green eyes that didn't shine like his own, but instead were narrowed and calculating, almost bored with the proceedings. He removed his mask, allowing it to hang free around his neck, much like his own. Izuku stared at himself and couldn't believe his eyes. His alternate's gaze sweeps over him, quick and dissecting, before he looks away in dismissal. My name is Entropy, the most wanted vigilante in the world. The purple one flicks his hood back next, and Izuku heard a sharp intake of breath from somewhere to the side. Purple eyes stared back at him, paired with wild purple hair and a futuristic metallic speech mask. Shinso Hitoshi looked around, and there was none of the wariness that their Hitoshi, the one who barely talked unless it was in a fight and was afraid to ask for kindness. This Hitoshi looked over them all lazily, as if he had all the time in the world, and Izuku could see the smirk in his eyes, as if all of them lived only to amuse him. My name is Siren. I suppose you could call me Entropy's right hand. Then the silver one reached for his hood, and it took Izuku a moment to identify him, if only because he was so different from the boy he knew. Dual-colored hair, but instead of flaming red, there was pure black, contrasting sharply with the silver side of his hair. It was also long enough that it would have reached Todoroki's waist if it wasn't tied up in a high ponytail. Now, there were two startled noises, one infuriated roar, one from their Todoroki, one from, strangely enough, Dabi, and the last from Endeavor, who was only held back from rushing in, fire blazing, by Aizawa's scarf and his glowing red eyes. The not Todoroki examined his alternative with careful eyes before dismissing him. His eyes lingered a little longer on his father, and Izuku thought he saw his fingers twitch, but his face remained stoic. Dabi gave a silent nod, for whatever reason. My name is Hellfrost, Entropy's left hand. Now! The nod Izuku's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Let's get this farce over with. I have killed you once. I shall enjoy doing it a second time. Hellfrost, if you would. The not Todoroki nodded, and suddenly a wall of ice as thick as 3 of Todoroki's usual glaciers sprung up, encircling and cutting off the 3 of them and All for One from view. Just as one of the heroes rushed and tried to break it, or maybe jump over it, the wall burst into blue flames. Izuku looked over at Dabi, but he just sat there shocked like the others. Because the wall wasn't melting, it somehow stayed perfectly strong with the flames dancing around it. All Might tried to punch it, but all he got was a barely cracked ice and handful of blisters. Every time hawks tried to fly over the wall, the flames spiked and shot out for the hero, forcing them to retreat. and Endeavor's flames did nothing. When Shigaraki rushed at the wall with an enraged shriek, hand outstretched and fingers splayed, Izuku intercepted him. He didn't know what was going on, but if his alternative self was on their side and believed he could defeat All for One, then he wasn't about to let Shigaraki get in the way. In the end, the fight didn't last very long. The heroes worked efficiently to subdue the villains, and with the help of All Might, whose hands were free from the main threat, they managed it without significant damage. The only thing to put a damper on Aizawa's mood was the escape of the League of Villains, or what remained of them. Kurogiri regained consciousness somewhere before someone could properly contain him and teleported Shigaraki out as soon as it was clear there was no winning this. So now the villains were being slowly gathered into police cars, and the first paramedics were rushing in to help the most injured. The battle behind the ice continued, and the ice remained impenetrable, but at this point, Aizawa wasn't sure if they could do anything. If even All for One's stray attacks hadn't broken it yet, then he suspected nothing would. He made his way carefully to where 3 of his students were standing, staring intently at the wall. It was understandable. Midoriya, Todoroki, and Shinso had all just been faced with the fact that their alternative selves were intentionally wanted vigilantes. Aizawa wasn't sure what happened to those kids, because they looked no older than his students, but he didn't like the look in their eyes. He knew that look well. He only saw it in the most cold-hearted of villains, the ones that didn't care on how many bodies they had to stand on to reach their goals. Finally, the sounds of battle quieted, and all the heroes, still on their scene, gathered closer to watch. The fire disappears first. Then there's a sizzling sort of sound, and suddenly an opening was burned straight through the ice, large enough to be considered a door. The Midoriya alternate steps out first, a short, bloody sword in his hands that was clearly wiped with a piece of cloth. His motions were sure and practiced, as if wiping off blood from a sword was something he had done often. It was jarring to see a boy, usually so filled with nervous energy, so still. Instead, every movement he had made was filled with intent so sharp Aizawa could feel it on his tongue. His hair was a tad singed, but other than that, he looked as if he dealt with nothing more than a petty criminal. Shinso stepped after him. His mask was dangling on his arm, probably torn off in the fight, and he was casually twisting a knife between his fingers. It pained Aizawa to see such a cold, detached look in his eyes. His gentle son, who cuddled their cats to sleep and sputtered at the mere mention of Kaminari. It was hard to see a steel edge to his smirk, to sense danger from his every movement, to think that Shinso could ever turn out like that. Todoroki, perhaps, changed the most in appearance. He was always cold and closed off, but that was more because he was unsure how to express himself than a genuine desire to be left alone. This Todoroki seemed different. He looked as if fire had burned out, leaving only ice to slowly freeze over his entire being. His long hair made him look like an entirely different person. He glanced back as he stepped out at last. Should we leave that there? Midoriya glanced back, looking somewhere beyond the walls for a moment before turning away. No, it'll burn down. You know what the doctor can do with a dead body. Todoroki nodded without question, and with a sweep of his hand, blue fire erupted and spread until it had filled the inside of the walls completely, and could be seen even above them. Then he sealed the opening back up and fell back with Midoriya. Their Todoroki took a step back, and Aizawa wondered if the brief flash of something passing over his face. He was distracted by the alternative Shinso as he drawled, "Still can't believe how satisfying that is, even for the second time." "I can." The not Todoroki deadpanned. "If you hate them enough, sometimes even twice is not enough," the not Midoriya said. the weight of experience behind his words. The other two nodded in agreement, their faces taking on a faraway look. Aizawa slowly approached the trio, the kids following cautiously behind. I assume All for One is dead? Midoriya's eyes snapped to him as soon as he moved, and they now narrowed, examining him. He nodded. As dead as he could be, which is very, very dead. Aizawa nodded back. He should deal with this as if the three were strangers, and in some sense, they might as well be. Right. We should get back to UA. I'm sure we all want to know what is happening and how to send you back home.
So, you say All for One summoned you from an alternative universe to defeat All Might. He thought you were villains, but you were actually vigilantes that happened to be against All for One. So the three of you decided to kill All for One?
Yes, Izuku said for the 100th time, already tired of repeating himself. The principal hummed and took a sip of his tea. Shoto, who was sitting on his right, deadpanned in his most bland tone. A dead All for One is always good. Then he looked at Izuku for approval, like he always did when it came to things that his father would have disapproved of, which meant everything other than being a hero. Izuku nodded, confirming that Endeavor would have disapproved of this, and it was therefore the right thing to do. Shoto's eyes lit up with triumph. Adorable. Hitoshi, on the other hand, didn't seem so enthused. We might have overreacted a bit, though. We did just murder our only way home. The principal seemed like he wanted to say something, but Izuku didn't give him the chance. He caught Hitoshi's eyes and gave him a one-shouldered shrug. I don't think we need a way back. These types of quirks usually have a time limit. The only problem is finding out the time limit. It could be a day, a week, or even a month. Even if there's somehow no time limit, we're not of this world. The universe is usually very good with correcting such things. For all we know, a person with just the right quirk will bump into us and send us home. Nezu gave him a considering look over his teacup.
You seem very knowledgeable in the workings of the universe.
In the background, he could hear his alternative self start mumbling, and vaguely wondered why the heroes hadn't suppressed that old habit of his yet. It was a huge security risk. Thinking back on all the shenanigans their team got into, not a small number of them funky enough to be considered fantastical even by their standards, Izuku had to agree with the principal. He inclined his head. You could say that. Out of the corner of his eyes, he could see Hitoshi smirking at the memories of those same adventures. And even Shoto's face became even stonier, which in Shoto speak meant he was cackling internally. Hitoshi stretched lazily, arching his back and exposing his throat tangentially. Izuku would have reprimanded him for such an obvious show of vulnerability if he wasn't staring so much. He averted his eyes immediately when Hitoshi resettled, but Shoto wasn't as fast and got a smug smirk from Hitoshi in response. Shoto turned to Rei. The curl of his lips was definitely a pout, even if it was invisible to most people. Not that this isn't fascinating, Hitoshi drawled, but we need to get back. The sooner the better. I have a little sister back home, and I don't trust her with Panda for longer than necessary. Knowing them, the world might not survive it. Izuku stilled, abruptly freezing over as if Shoto used his quirk on him. He almost forgot. Eri was with Mei. Alone. In their base. Where the lab was. Oh dear, this was a disaster. Who knew what Mei would invent when she had a resource like Eri's quirk freely available? And Eri would be all too happy to oblige her Aunt Mei, the sweet thing. They will either destroy the world or take it over. Shoto deadpanned. Somehow I'm hoping for the former. Who knows what Panda will do with a world under her command? Izuku muttered. Shinso snorted. The bastard. Without you to rein her in, boss? Maybe it would be better if we just stayed here. We can't leave the princess there, Shoto said, though tellingly, he didn't say anything about the rest of the world.
And who is this panda, I may ask?
Izuku gave the principal a bland look. You don't have to worry about her. She will not affect your world. As for us, I have fail-safes in place. Hitoshi craned his neck to look his twin in the eye. You have a little sister? The other Shinso asked. Izuku was just going to start addressing the alternatives by their last names to avoid confusion. Hitoshi craned his neck to look his twin in the eye. There was an easy smirk playing on his lips. Adopted. If she's our sister, does that mean Izuku is our dad? Shoto asked thoughtfully. Izuku could practically feel the entire room collectively choke on air. Midoriya looked like he was about to combust. Shut up, Shoto. You know she's not my daughter. Izuku snapped before any more calculations about his age could be made by a very concerned-looking Aizawa. Hitoshi's smirk grew, teeth as he purred. I don't know, Izuku. She does call you daddy. Izuku glared. Midoriya squeaked, face redder than tomato. What? It took Izuku several seconds to figure out the problem, and when he did, he whipped his head to Midoriya and curled his lips into a barely there sneer. Not like that, you creep. I adopted her. He had the feeling that everyone just collectively let out a sigh of relief, except for the principal, who was just as unflappable as ever. Who did these people think he was? Some third-rate gangster? Hitoshi chuckled breathily and drawled in that low, vibrating tone that made Izuku curse voice work users everywhere, because the way it flowed like liquid gold along his skin should be considered a weapon, and in of itself. Give him a break, Zuko. The guy just needs to get laid and relax. He eyed Midoriya predatorily and smirked, the curve of it downright filthy. The poor kid got so red so fast that Izuku feared for his blood pressure. Or kill someone. It's very therapeutic, Shoto added, his tone monotone, but with that special brand of bloodlust lacing each word that consistently made Izuku shiver with need. Shoto tilted his head, the bangs framing his face falling onto one eye, making him look menacing without one change in his expression. Izuku carefully controlled his reactions, but by the way both Hitoshi's and Shoto's eyes snapped to him, intense and predatory, he wasn't as discreet as he had hoped. Shinso recovered first. You can't just suggest murder to hero students. Shoto blinked at the boy, uncomprehending. Izuku had to wonder why. Was it the question, or the uncharacteristic outburst he had never seen from their Hitoshi? It helped me. He shrugged, eventually, and Izuku wanted to groan. You don't just give away that kind of information to pro-heroes. You were a hero student? Midoriya yelped. You killed someone? Todoroki asked at the same time. Shoto blinked again. Hitoshi snorted. Yes. Shoto answered eventually. I was a hero student. And yes, I killed someone. I thought that was obvious. He gestured to the tanto strapped to his back, a blade they all used. That quieted down the room. Aizawa stepped forward from where he was leaning against the windowsill to almost shield his students with his body. Our priority right now should be figuring out what to do with you until you get sent back. You said that could last months. Izuku waved his hand dismissively. That's not an issue. We could be discreet if you wanted to. You won't even notice our presence. I'm sure our worlds can't be too different. Nezu put down his cup with a slight clink, drawing the room's attention back to himself. Little unnecessarily, if you asked Izuku, as Shoto's and Hitoshi's eyes never left the rat, while Izuku was conversing with Eraserhead.
I'm afraid that is not possible,
the principal squeaked in his high voice.
The League of Villains knows you are here, and won't stop hunting you down now that you've defeated All for One. There's no doubt that this would attract the attention of the public. While I have no doubt you can hide your identities as well, the appearance of 3 new vigilantes right after All Might's retirement would cause unnecessary panic and further destabilize the already precarious situation. There is also the fact that you've revealed your identities in front of a dozen heroes.
Izuku finally moved. Until now, he was content to leave the discussion to his teammates and the principal. But he won't stand for the rat threatening his people. He crossed one leg over the other, ankle to knee, and propped his elbow on his knee and chin on his other hand, then leaned forward, just a little, eyes intent and narrowed on Nezu. He was gratified to see the animal's fur stand on end at his look, but Izuku didn't let up, studying the mouse like he was measuring where to cut the best meat. Oh, and who, pray tell, will stop us? Izuku flicked his eyes to the 3 students still standing behind Nezu, then to Aizawa, and back to the animal. We are not your students, Principal Nezu. We are not heroes, and we are not afraid to hurt you if necessary. Not when we are not even of this world. What's stopping us from going on a rampage? From having fun without consequences? We could kill anyone we want. Here, Izuku made a puffing sound, imitating falling confetti with his free hand. And it will simply go away once we get back. He leaned back to lounge comfortably in his chair. I'm sure you know of our capabilities. Now imagine if your students were trained properly and not afraid to kill. How much damage Todoroki alone could cause? How much would it be with us working together? Izuku smirked, and it was full of teeth and predatory intent. He could almost taste blood on his tongue as he licked his lips. Can you really afford that, Principal Nezu?